welcome to the Solocast of Firecode Tech. In these episodes, it's just going to be me, your host, Gus Gagliardi. There's going to be a range of topics, but I'm going to talk about specific technologies, installation standards, codes and how they work, as well as some other interesting topics that don't neatly fit inside of the context of a normal interview. Hello all, welcome to episode 29 of the Solocast of Firecode Tech. On this episode, we're talking about assembly occupancies. Yes, there is a unique fire and life safety history for assembly occupancies and also some additional concerns whenever you are dealing with large groups of people. So I wanted to take this opportunity in the Solocast to talk about some of these occupancy-specific features because they can trigger some costly implications for fire and life safety design. One of the big reasons why fire and life safety is so strict for assembly occupancies is because we have a long history of rather deadly fires that are associated with assembly occupancies. NFPA has some great resources for assembly occupancies and their fire histories. Some of the most deadly fires in U.S. history are associated with assembly occupancies. The Coconut Grove fire took nearly 500 people's lives. We also talked about the Iroquois Theater fire in a previous Solocast episode. There is a lot to be learned from these historic fires, so I would invite you to take a look at some of the resources NFPA has on these deadly fires. I'll drop a link down in the show notes if you want to find out some more information. Otherwise, I'll probably be talking about some of these historic fires in future Solocast episodes. So let's talk about the definition of an assembly occupancy. For this episode, I'm using the 2015 version of the International Building Code, and we are in Section 303, which speaks to assembly occupancies. It's the Use and Occupancy chapter of the Building Code, which is Chapter 3, and it says, Assembly Group A. Occupancy includes, among others, the use of the building or structure or portion thereof for the gathering of persons, for the purposes such as civic, social, or religious functions, recreation, food, drink, consumption, or awaiting transportation. So as you can see in this occupancy, we are really talking about places where people gather in large numbers. So I want to take the listener through the different types of assembly occupancies in the building code because they all have different safety and fire requirements, but they are generally speaking in the same order of magnitude. So like I said previously, we're in section 303 of the International Building Code, and let's talk about Group A occupancies or assembly occupancies and go through the 4 different types of assembly occupancies. So each different assembly occupancy has a different definition and some examples of what kind of buildings are considered by the building code as assembly occupancies. Now, there's not always an explicit example of the occupancy you might be dealing with, so they provide a couple examples so that you can get some idea of how to extrapolate your building use and occupancy in order to use your judgment as a fire and life safety professional for what are the applicable codes and standards. So let's talk about Group A1 assembly occupancies. First off, the definition says, Group A1 occupancy includes assembly uses, usually with fixed seating, intended for the production of viewing of the performing arts or motion pictures, including, but not limited to, motion picture theaters. Okay, so these are the examples of Group A1. So it gives a broad overview in the definition, and then now we're going to talk about specific examples. And so the first example is theaters, where you can watch movies. Second example is symphony and concert halls. Third example is television and radio studios admitting an audience. And the fourth example is theaters, so like where you would see plays and whatnot. So as you can kind of tell, there's a bit of variation between these examples, but they all kind of have a same kind of feel and use to them. A1 is each of these different groups have a bit different fire and life safety implication, and I believe that A1 has some of the more stricter requirements, and then it kind of decreases in fire and life safety severity as we go down to A5. So I misspoke before, there's 5 Group A occupancies. Moving on to A2 or Group A2. Definition reads, Group A2 occupancy includes assembly uses intended for food and drink or consumption, including but not limited to banquet halls, casino gaming areas, nightclubs, restaurant cafeterias, or similar dining facilities, including associated commercial kitchens, and taverns or bars. Moving on to Group A3, I think that in my experience, Group A3 is the widest category and the one that I've seen the most in my design practice. Usually there are a lot of accessory assembly occupancy usage, and we could talk about some specific instances and how you know if it's assembly or not, if it's very close or on the threshold. Say you're looking at a conference room or something. We'll talk about that later, but Group A3 occupancies are a bit of a catch-all. The definition says, Group A3 occupancy includes assembly uses intended for worship, recreation, or amusement, and other assembly uses not classified elsewhere in Group A, including but not limited to. And there's more examples here than any of the other groups, but arcades, art galleries, bowling alleys, community halls, courtrooms, dance halls, exhibition halls, funeral parlors, gymnasiums, indoor swimming pools, indoor tennis courts, lecture halls, libraries, museums, places of religious worship, pool and billiard parlors, pool halls, waiting areas, and transportation terminals. This seems like a bit of a dustbin category, and it is. So if you are unsure if you have a accessory use of a business occupancy or in another occupancy, and you believe it's assembly, likely it is a A3. We'll go through Group A4 and A5 a little quicker because I don't see them as much. Maybe, I guess it depends on which occupancies you work on the most, but I think Group A1 through A3 are a bit more common. Group A4 occupancy includes assembly uses intended for viewing of indoor sporting events and activities with spectator seating, including but not limited to arenas, skating rinks, swimming pools, and tennis courts. So this is a kind of open air or indoor sports activity. Maybe you could also consider like a basketball court, indoor basketball court, this kind of assembly occupancy. Group A5 occupancy includes assembly uses intended for participation in viewing outdoor activities, including but not limited to amusement park structures, bleachers, grandstands, and stadiums. Never had the opportunity to design a stadium or amusement park structure, but imagine that would be very difficult unless that's something that you did super frequently. So we just went over the 5 different types of assembly groups and what an assembly occupancy is. But now I want to talk about some of the different fire protection features. We'll see how far we get, but first off, I want to talk about fire suppression systems. So Chapter 903, which is automatic sprinkler systems, speaks about occupancy-specific fire suppression requirements. So there are a variety of different qualifying factors in the building code that might require you to have a sprinkler system, but a large assembly occupancy is a very fast way to ensure that you're going to need a fire suppression system. So I won't talk about all of the different sections that are speaking to the requirement in regard to assembly occupancies and sprinkler systems, but there are a common couple of features for a building to have with an assembly occupancy that would trigger a fire suppression system being required. So let's just take a look at the most severe one, which is for A2 occupancy. In specific, we're looking at section 903.2.1.2. This section states, an automatic sprinkler system shall be provided for areas containing group A2 occupancies in intervening floors of the building where one of the following conditions exist. So this is a great place for you to go check. If an architect brings you a floor plan for a building, and it's a community center or a place that has a large assembly space, and you want to determine if a sprinkler system is needed. Check if you have a large assembly space, categorize that use and occupancy, and then come to section 903 and find which specific occupancy requirements that you might be meeting. The first qualifying factor is fire area, and it says if the fire area exceeds 5,000 square feet. So this is not that dramatic of a requirement for a large assembly space. If you're dealing with a building that is, I've worked on a large theater recently with, a stage and a big open seating area that's more than 40,000 square feet. So it is not uncommon for these assembly spaces to be rather large. So if your largest fire area in your A2 occupancy exceeds 5,000 square feet, then you need a sprinkler system. The second requirement is the fire area has an occupant load of 100 or more. So we haven't talked about some of the life safety features yet, but it's very easy to get an occupant load of 100 people for a lot of these assembly occupancies. We could talk about life safety features specifically, but there are instances in which you can get 15 or 7 square feet per person net, and so that adds up very fast. The third provision is the fire area is located on a floor other than the level of exit discharge, serving such occupancies. So that might be a really easy qualification to meet. If you have a 2-story building without, some level of exit discharge, then you need a sprinkler system. So you can see that these fire and life safety requirements, they activate very quickly for these type of buildings. So as we talk about these common thresholds that might require additional fire and life safety equipment, occupant load is a huge factor. Common occupant load factors which are impactful are 100, 300, 500, and 1,000. So if you just kind of have those round numbers in your head where you see an occupant load exceeding those different thresholds, have in your mind that there's a very good chance that there are additional fire protection and life safety requirements to be had if you see these factors. Let's move on to fire alarm. Looking in section 907 of the 2015 edition of the International Building Code, we're looking specifically at Group A occupancies, and that is section 907.2.1, Group A. And this is the requirement for a fire alarm system. It says a manual fire alarm system that activates occupant notification in accordance with 907.5 shall be installed in Group A occupancies, where the occupant load due to the assembly occupancy is more than 300 or more. Then it goes on to say Group A occupancies not separated from one another in accordance with 907.3.10 shall be considered a single occupancy for the purposes applying to this section. Portions of Group E occupancies occupied for assembly purposes shall be provided with a fire alarm system as required for Group E occupancies. Then there's an exception for the omission of manual fire alarm boxes if your building has an automatic sprinkler system installed in accordance with section 903.3.1.1, and it says, and the occupant notification appliances will activate throughout the notification zones upon sprinkler water flow. That is a very long, drawn-out way to say if you got 300 or more people, because of your assembly occupancy, you need a fire alarm system, and it has to be a manual fire alarm system unless you have a sprinkler system that activates your fire alarm. Here's the big kicker for fire alarm systems and assembly occupancies, and it's the next section down, which is 907.2.1.1. System initiation in Group A occupancies with an occupant load of 1,000 or more. And it says, activation of the fire alarm in Group A occupancies with an occupant load of 1,000 or more shall initiate a signal using an emergency voice alarm communication system in accordance with 907.5.2.2. So this means you need a voice evacuation system if your building has an occupant load of 1,000 or more. This is a big deal. This takes your fire alarm system from just your standard horn strobe system to voice, which it can be as much as like 10 times more for the cost of your fire alarm system, depending on all the features you need. So this is a very big deal for you to determine as early as possible in the cycle of the facility. Not only does it have a huge cost implication, but it has a huge design implication because there are more devices to coordinate and more equipment to locate for these systems. So those are a couple of the big fire systems that might be required. Looks like next time we will get into some more of the fire and life safety features for assembly occupancies, and we can take a look at some of the other common features of assembly occupancies, like some of the other specific code sections that are commonly applicable, like for instance, section 410 in chapter 4, which is stages, platforms, and technical production areas, and commercial kitchen equipment, like we talked about when describing the groups. But we will see you next time on Fire Code Tech. Thank you for listening. Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.